Hello. So, in this video, we're going to talk about Ken Ludwig's play, Dear Jack, Dear Louise. I don't typically like Ken Ludwig that much. I've read one or two of his plays, and I've seen productions of a few of them. Most of what I've seen from him have been farces, and they're okay. They are what they are. They're fairly basic, in my view, farces that depend on the typical elements of farce. I don't think they're necessarily especially well done or interesting, but it is what it is. Dear Jack, Dear Louise is different. This is an epistolary play, which is a fairly unusual form. So an epistolary novel was a novel that was written through letters between the characters, right? So typically you would have, say, one character writing a letter describing a thing that is going on in their life and their reaction to it, etc., etc. The other character would respond, we would get more information, etc., etc. It was a very, very popular form for a very short period of time early in the history of the novel. And then people mostly sort of said, this isn't that interesting a way of writing novels, so we're going to basically stop doing it. By and large, no one writes epistolary plays, in part because they're not that performable. And this is actually my big problem with Dear Jack, Dear Louise. The play itself, I actually think, reads pretty well. So if this were what's called closet drama, which is a play written to be read rather than performed, cool. I actually think it's quite good in that instance. There's some minor issues I still have with it, but I think it's basically interesting. The characters are likable. They're well developed through these letters. The conflicts that they deal with are cool and interesting and compelling. If it's meant to be performed, I don't know how well it's going to work. And I will talk more about that. So the premise of Dear Jack, Dear Louise is basically that we have these two characters who are, to greater or lesser extents, based on Ludwig's own parents. His father, Jack Ludwig, was a doctor in the army during World War II, and his mother, Louise Rabiner, was not massively successful, but moderately successful Broadway performer. And they exchange, basically the premise is that they have not met, but their parents are trying to sort of fix them up, and they start exchanging these letters back and forth, over which they develop an affection for one another. They make various attempts to sort of arrange to meet, but he has trouble getting leave from the army, and he periodically gets sort of called out onto ships in the Pacific during battles, and then in the latter portion of the play, he gets sent to Europe as part of the D-Day invasion and subsequent liberation of France. She makes various attempts to get Broadway parts, etc., etc. She does meet his family and has some adventures with them, largely in the form of Jack's sister probably, maybe accidentally pushing her out a window. So we've got all of that stuff going on. She eventually gets a part with a touring production of What's a Poppin', I think. I think that's the play that she gets a part with. I could be wrong about that. but it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this summary. So she gets this touring part, and he gets leave before he's sent off to Europe, but because she is on the road with this production, they can't meet. So they actually don't meet until the very, very end of the play on VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, or in a celebration thereof. So I think it's actually quite interesting as a historical document, right? As a document in which my sense is that Ludwig based this on actual letters from his parents. There are some things that are clearly altered and some things that are stylized, as you would expect. But my sense is that the core of a lot of this is fairly genuine. And in that sense, it's really quite interesting. You get a sense of both the experience of people in the army and people on the home front during World War II, and get to sort of have a sense of the personal dimension of these major historical events. And I always find that really, really fascinating. I have one minor issue with the historicity of it, which is that at one point in discussing the play Arsenic and Old Lace, in a letter ostensibly from 1942, Louise mentions that Cary Grant was in the film version, which is true, but the film version came out in 1944. So I think that's an instance, and possibly some of the other references to performances, plays, etc., maybe additions by Ken Ludwig to make it more comprehensible for modern audiences, who are much more likely to know the film with Cary Grant by Frank Capra than they are to know the original Broadway performances of the play in 1941. So there's that little anachronistic bit there that I've caught. And to be honest, I caught that because I was reading this play to do dramaturg's notes for a production by Zapkin Buskin. And so one of the things that I do when dramaturging is I go through and I basically identify any term, reference, anything that I think somebody might plausibly want to know an explanation of, and I give us a basic explanation of it in my notes. And so I looked up when the film version with Cary Grant came out and found that it came out in 1944, which would be 2 years after the ostensible date of this letter. So that's a problem for chronology. But speaking of the performance, I imagine Zapkin Buskin will do quite well with this because everything that I've seen or been in by Zapkin Buskin, they've been excellent. And I know one of the people who's involved. He's excellent. So he's going to do fantastic. I don't know the other person, the person who's playing Louise. And I know the director and producer, and collectively they're going to do a fantastic job with this script. But in my view, it is not really a script that lends itself to being performed. There's very little dramatic action. There's very little that actually happens. It is primarily about the development of the characters and the expression of their opinions, perspectives, hopes, desires, fears, anxieties, etc. And this is really what the epistolary form is good for, right? It is really good for the development of character psychology, but on stage, not much happens, right? There's a very little interaction between Jack and Louise, there are bits of it where they seem to sort of break out of the letters and have short conversations, but that's not the majority of it. I would say the majority of it is the characters reading or performing their letters to one another. And from the perspective of someone watching a play, just having someone read or recite a letter doesn't do that much. It's not really that interesting necessarily as a visual spectacle. And theater is a visual medium nowadays. I mean, once upon a time, you talked about going to hear a play because it was the words that matter, but in modern contemporary theater culture, we talk about seeing a play. It is a performance to be viewed. And there's just not much that happens in this play to be viewed. Everything that happens is really to be heard. And so that, I think, makes it a difficult play in terms of staging it and having the staging be interesting.